And apologies.
Good. None of that got recorded.
But I didn't want to switch. I realized partway through that I hadn't switched on recording, but it seemed a bit rude to switch it on whilst you were actually talking.
Well, thank you. I'll shut up now. I know you got a lot more meeting to get to, but I personally am really excited about the potential here. So
fantastic. So I won't ask you to say all that again. That would be a bit unfair. But for the record, that was a Deleg record. I think it was called to be discussed next RIPE in the DNS working group. And in the chat, Vicky's put a link to I presume something relevant on that in GitHub, which I'll include with the notes for people to catch up on. Yes, sorry for not having recording switched on. So that's a disadvantage of not doing this for a couple of weeks. You get out of the out of practice of doing the right things in the right order. But yeah, that sounds like a really good thing to have come out of the hackathon, which is amazing. Which is exactly the purpose of this call. So before I move on, anyone else got anything else to say about the hackathon? I'm inclined to say follow that on one level, because that's pretty impressive. Okay, let's move on to the sort of the main meeting itself, which we kicked off on the Sunday evening, by the way, with a welcome reception, which was very nice, so very well attended. There were just under 1,100 people registered on site, and it felt like a good percentage of those people were present for the welcome reception, at least at some point, judging from how busy the room was. But subjectively, it felt like there was certainly a decent percentage of the total number of on-site people present there. But anyway, moving into the main body of the meeting on Monday, as hopefully some of you picked up from an update I sent out just before the start of the meeting, the TLS working group did include an update on ECH, which wasn't originally planned, but then the agenda changed and it did. To summarize, and I'll come back to this later on, whilst there's a few sort of loose ends to tie up in the current encrypted client hello draft, the expectation is that those will be sort of dealt with in the next sort of few days. So within a week or so, I suspect, of the meeting, that they should have been dealt with. And the intent then is to move the draft forward to working group last call. Obviously, in an expectation, it should then move to the ISG in due course, depending on what comes up in the working group last call. So clearly, if anyone has any comments they wish to make on the CH proposal, then if you haven't done so yet, and ideally do so now, but if not, certainly if you like, your next opportunity will be during the working group last call, before it moves to the ISG. So just to be aware of that. That was probably, I think that was pretty much the main thing coming out of the TLS meeting. Well, for me anyway. There was a whole bunch of other stuff that was the sort of most significant thing. I'm just quickly look at my notes to see if I picked up anything else sort of major, but I think that was probably it. Moving through Monday, and as I say, if people want to interject with other observations, please do so, but otherwise I shall plough on. DOLT, detecting unwanted location trackers, BOF was held. There was a DOLT BOF, in case you were unsure, in San Francisco, so this was a second BOF on the same topic. Basically, for the avoidance of doubt, this is about AirTag or tile type trackers as distinct from software trackers, and the proposal was finding a way of detecting that perhaps unbeknownst to you, somebody had placed something on your person, or maybe in a bag you're carrying, or some other object. I understand that Apple, Google, and I think some of the other hardware manufacturers had planned to do something, but wanted, if possible, to do it within the IETF. So a standard resulted, and I'm pretty confident on the strength of the discussion in the session in Prague last week that a working group will be created to take that forward. That certainly seemed to be the rough consensus of the room from what I could tell. So I think that's the likely next step for that. I think the use case that was focused on in both this BOF and the previous one was the sort of the so-called abusive partner, sort of placing something on their victim in order to track them. There are clearly other use cases as well, and also some use cases that will be negatively affected potentially. But that's, if you like, the underlying use case that was used to illustrate the need for that particular activity. Moving on through Monday, RASP, the Research and Analysis of Standard Setting Processes research group, had a series of interesting presentations, which I think would be well worth your while taking a look at. In fact, one of them we will almost certainly cover on this call in the next few weeks, which is the Internet Standards Tracker, which is a demonstration that Carolina in the DNS Research Federation team gave. They have a built and working standards tracker for, I think it was for the ITU, and are planning to do something similar for the IETF, although I don't know how far progressed that is yet, but it would be sort of be similar, at least conceptually, to the existing version. And they didn't do a live demo, but through slides, Carolina and one of her colleagues in the DNS Research Federation sort of explained what it did, how broadly how it operated, and some of the capabilities. And as I say, I'll be asking Carolina to on this call in a few weeks' time to potentially revisit that presentation, because I think it will be of interest, particularly given the intent is to have a version working for some of the IETF activity. Probably the other one I'll mention specifically is the third one on the slide, which is CDNs and states. Nick Merrill, who gave a presentation in San Francisco last time round on CDNs, gave a further presentation this time, looking at centralization, different aspects of centralization, and that was essentially his focus in the context of CDNs. He gave a really interesting presentation, I thought, and definitely well worth you catching up on that if you didn't catch it during the meeting. But he's doing some really interesting work, and actually coincidentally that one, or that activity, I think I'm right in saying is funded via a grant that was provided via the DNS Research Federation. I think George is on the call, so she might comment if that's completely wrong and I'm misremembering, but either way, it was an interesting presentation, and yeah, I think Nick's doing some really good work in this sort of general space. That's all I've got to say on the Monday activity, because I didn't go to the Dane working group, but I'll pause there in case anyone else has anything to add on any of those, or indeed anything else that took place on the Monday. So just pause for a second to see if anyone does. It It's not looking like that's the case. I can't see any hands raised or anything in the chat currently. So I will progress through the week, and then again, if people do have things to add, do interject as we come along, as we go along. Sorry. Okay, moving on to Tuesday. Tuesday morning for me kicked off with another BOF, this time called SPICE, slightly contrived titled Secure Patterns for Internet Credentials, which was a really interesting proposal. As I understand it, it's triggered by an EU digital credentials project, which needs a secure way of exchanging credentials between parties, and they're trying to do it in a sort of data minimized way, so that, for example, different use cases, plenty of different use cases here, but as an example, if I wanted to go to a website which had a minimum age requirement, theoretically at least you could securely assert through these credentials that you were over the minimum age threshold, ideally without disclosing any other personal information such as your date of birth, but literally just say, yes, this person, say it's a social media use, is over 13, or for other use cases is over 18 or whatever. Or for an employer, you could disclose that you had certain qualifications without having to disclose lots of other personal information, etc. So they sort of talked around it during the BOF. I think there were some concerns it could be used as a mechanism, once it existed, for people to insist on the availability of a sort of digital ID, etc. But I think that's outside of the scope of the BOF, which is simply looking to build or develop was proposing to develop the relevant protocols to allow secure exchange of credentials between parties. I thought on balance it was a good thing to do. I don't know if other people that were in the room that were on this call had any other thoughts or observations on that. Again, I'll pause for a second on this one specifically in case you did.
Hi, Andrew, it's Michael Richardson.
Hi, Michael. Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. Just wanted to put my headphone on before I tried to talk. So I think it's important to understand that there's basically a tussle between whether or not the W3C can or wants to do this, whether or not people want to have RDF as part of their credentials or not, because it's a pretty large technology stack that not everyone wants to deal with. And then finally, whether or not the OAuth working group wouldn't be just a better place to just do this and do it in CBOR and in, or COSI and in Jose. And then there's the side kind of thing as to whether or not there's any blockchain people still trying to do something with this. And how do we ask them politely to leave? And so I would say those are the kind of tussles that this working group or this BOF is going to have to work through. And I'm actually of the opinion that rechartering OAuth is probably the right answer, but it's not clear that all the OAuth people agree. But I think actually that's the best result.
Yeah. Okay.
Michael, this is Kathleen. It was too early in the morning, so I didn't listen to Spice yet. I do plan to listen to it. And I'm curious, is OAuth the right place, or could GNAP be the right place? OAuth is just, there's a lot of baggage with OAuth.
My understanding of GNAP is that they're not primarily dealing with the fundamental identity objects there, that we already have the Jose selective disclosure document well in its way in the OAuth working group, and having a COT version of that would not be hard. The OAuth people are concerned that they don't have enough cycles to finish the work they have. But then there's like a 50% overlap with any new group. But the question is, can we simply increase the size of the, the number of participants to make it work? There's some common chairs, there's some other stuff there, and I don't have the answer. But I don't think GNAP is really the right place, because I don't think fundamentally they're dealing with the identity objects there. They're dealing with new interactions and improving the OAuth interaction, rather than dealing with just OpenID Connect's underlying technology.
Okay, I do have to catch back up on it.
I would liken it to the difference between TLS and PKIX, right? Of course, you could put certificate work in TLS if you had to, but you'd only do that because you didn't have anywhere else to do it.
Yeah, no, so I led the design group for GNAP, and I've stepped away since just for lack of time, but I'll step back and look. And my thought at the time was that GNAP really should have been OAuth 3.0, so that we could get rid of a lot of, and so that, let me finish speaking, so that we could get rid of the baggage that OAuth brings. So I don't want to derail your whole conversation here, Andrew, but I'll take a look at all of that and just wonder really what we should be doing, so we're not bringing all the OAuth baggage into things.
Yeah.
Former ADs agree with me, right? So when we've looked at it, OAuth just isn't secure.
During the chartering of GNAP, my memory was that everyone said, why isn't this OAuth 3 as opposed to OAuth 2.5? Yep. And I had no opinion, but I do know that discussion happened. You're absolutely right.
There was also a slightly fun discussion about the right to paper and having digital stuff was bad. In the case of identity, which felt a little bit surreal in the IETF, albeit there's obviously a strong sort of privacy orientation for many of the participants. But that struck me as an interesting take, particularly given a number of the European countries have a mandatory requirement to carry ID, not necessarily digital ID, with you, which I think some of the participants were maybe unaware of. That you certainly have to carry some form of ID in some countries. I'm not sure about Czechia, but certainly some other European states you do. I'm conscious, Marek, you had your hand raised and then lowered it. Was there something you wanted to come in on whilst we were chatting there?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of this kind of background is really useful, because I kind of went into that as someone who doesn't kind of track digital identity sort of standardization as closely. And I think that there were probably quite a few other people in that BOF who were kind of commenting without kind of knowing the intricacies of all this kind of existing work, both in the IETF and elsewhere. And I think that was maybe part of the problem. But I guess I'm also conscious that the IAB was going to be kind of starting a program to look at kind of digital identity in some form or another. And I guess I'm not really seeing how that kind of activity either could kind of like help this conversation or kind of, on the other hand, if it's kind of just another disconnected piece of this puzzle. But the background was useful. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Marek. Anyone that even has a passing interest in this general area, definitely worth watching the recording of that session. I thought it was a good, interesting discussion, albeit perhaps as with Marek, it's not an area I claim enormous prior knowledge of. So that's what was interesting to me. Now, the next session I went to because of other commitments was the IEB Open, but there was a session too. So anyone that has any observations on anything that took place, then feel free to either jump in, unmute, or put something in the chat if you prefer, if that's easier. But otherwise, I'll go straight to the IEB Open, which sort of gave some updates on some of the recent IEB workshops. quite brief updates, if I'm honest, and some of the other IB activity, without any or much interaction from the mic, or at least not that I recall, and then went on to a number of sort of different presentations, which again, they were quite interesting, so worth catching up on if you have time and interest. I then had to sort of skip over DNS Ops because of having to prep for the side meeting. So if anyone's got anything to comment on from the first of the two DNS Ops meetings, feel free to do so. It was a busy agenda, as they always are for DNS Ops, despite having two slots, one on Tuesday, one later in the week. It was still very busy, with a lot of ground to cover.
I mean, it's worth saying that the recording of DNS Ops is worth watching, because it talks about the Deleg record that David was talking about earlier. So there's a lot of detail in there about that, which was news to me at the time. So it was good to see it.
Was that in that first session, Brett?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in the second session, didn't remember that, so thank you for just in case I wasn't paying attention. Okay, well that's useful to know. So for anyone that we unfortunately missed the update on the Derek discussion because I forgot to press the record button in time, but it's good to know that some of that also took place in the first of the two DNS Ops sessions last week. And then on Tuesday, we finished the day with a sort of fairly late side meeting. Actually, it was 7:30 till 8 in the end, because we decided to free up some time because those sort of side meeting rooms were under a fair amount of pressure for various uses. But I'll come back to that after we've sort of run through this, and I probably ought to speed up a little. So yeah, I will just speed up a bit. So ADD was the first session on the Wednesday, was really positive. It sort of kicked off with an announcement that 3 of our earlier work items had now concluded the process and have been published, I think, the previous week as RFCs. So that included DDR and DNR, but both now as RFCs, which is, you know, the first, if you like, tangible output from the ADD working group. If you like, its reason for being in the first place, which is fantastic. So that was really good to see. And then there was some good discussion on a number of new or newer items, plus a couple of reminders about some working group last call documents. Tiru in particular, I think he gave 3 out of the 4 presentations on those 4 items listed on the slide. So as always, extremely busy with his contributions to the IETF community, which was very impressive. And there was a sort of, felt to me like a very good discussion in the room, with sort of various things being picked up. I think of the 2 new topics, it felt to me at least one of the 2, quite possibly both, will there will be a call about adoption by the working group. Will be my take on the discussion, but that's what it felt like in the room. It felt like there's a good case for that. Just pause for breath in case anyone wanted to jump in with any different takes on any of that. And if not, I'll just, again, conscious of the time, so continue on. Again, because of other commitments, I didn't join the ops management or quick sessions I mentioned on the side, and obviously because ADD clashed with the measurement analysis of protocols research group, I obviously wasn't in that simultaneously. So that's what I'll be wanting to catch up on at some point in the next week or so, just to sort of, because there were some interesting presentations on the agenda. And then we finished the day, as always, on Wednesday with the IETF plenary, which did use the full allocation of 2 hours on crudely procedural stuff. administrative stuff, which is interesting if you're involved in the IETF, maybe not so much if you're not, but it seemed pretty well attended again, with certainly a few hundred people in the room for the duration. But as I say, to be honest, if you're not into the operation of the IETF, maybe that's of less immediate interest. So I'll continue on at pace. Thursday then, Mimi, more instant messaging interoperability. So it's looking at how you can get interoperability between different end-to-end encrypted instant messaging systems. My takeout from this first session was work has progressed quite a lot. There seems to be a sort of an architecture coming into place. There's a design team has been formed within the working group, and that has been doing work in background. So it felt like that is sort of reasonably well advanced, and certainly continue to advance at a decent pace. Again, I'll pause in case anyone that's on this call was in the room wants to add anything more specific. But otherwise, I'll just note that for those of you that might have an interest in that, it's definitely worth sort of looking at that. And again, as with DNS Ops, there were two Mimi sessions, this one and then one on Friday. So both of those will be worth your while looking at if you've got a general interest in that space. General Area Dispatch, again, was more IETF admin related things, principally around whether there should be expiry dates on internet drafts, for example, and on sort of how licensing, some aspects of licensing. So if you just have a passing interest in IETF stuff, that may be not such a useful thing to look at. It was interesting to be in the room, but as I say, less so if you're not directly interested in that stuff. So what I will also highlight, though, is IETF Open Meeting. As always, they tend to have some really good presentations. You'll see the ones I highlighted sort of prior, which were automatically finding RFC compliance bugs in the name server, etc. And probably the third one for those interested in privacy, network measurement methods for locating and examining censorship devices. I think all three of these were award-winning presentations from the scheme that the IETF oversees from academia. So again, use your judgment if those are things that are in your sphere of interest. If they are, then they'll definitely be worth your while catching up on. And in absence of people jumping in, I will just sort of round off on Friday. As I said, the sort of DNS Ops, this was the sort of second of the two sessions. Again, sort of packed agenda. I think the co-chairs did an amazing job. I think we only overran the meeting by about 5 minutes. So 5 minutes on the sort of back end of 2 hours, I think, is pretty impressive. Given the sheer volume of content. Which I won't attempt to summarise now because there were a lot of papers. So as with the other one, if you've got interest in DNS, have a look at that. It's too much to summarise. I then sort of missed the second two sessions because I got involved in other discussions. But I do know that Mimi had some. So a couple of user discovery drafts, one of which I think was being presented by Vittorio from Open Exchange, and that seemed to be the missing bit of Mimi was how to find services. So it's good to see that is happening, but I haven't seen those presentations yet to really be able to comment on them. So I'll probably stop talking there for a second and see again if anyone's got anything else to add from any of that from the week, who was in person in Prague, wants to jump in. And if so, just unmute or pop something in the chat if you do. And if not, I'll proceed and just briefly touch on the side meeting. If something occurs to you in the meantime, probably easiest pop it in the chat, or we can include it in a roundup at the end. But what I will do, keep one eye on the clock, is to just briefly, actually these might be slightly out of order, apologies, go on to the, I had some side meeting slides. Let me just see if I can locate them. I didn't overwrite them. I put them in the wrong place, that's why. So, okay. Right, let me jump around. Talk about the side meeting. So we had a reminder on the Tuesday evening, we had a side meeting. This was deliberately timed to take place after the TLS working group, so we knew what the outcome was of any discussion on ECH. I won't put up all the slides that we used. I just put up two. One of which was just where we just make sure everyone was aware that the intent for the TS working group was to move quite soon to working group last call on ECH. So we're assuming that is moving forward. So we had a discussion about whether there was a need to continue with a standalone deployment considerations document. And in essence, I just made the point that although there was now some commentary on deployment considerations in the main draft, it was pretty high level, and there wasn't space to go into much detail on it, and there was a need to actually capture that detail somewhere. And we did took a view from the room. The vast majority of the people seem to concur that there was a requirement. Caveat, we'll need to sort of agree this sort of definitively with the relevant area directors, but I wanted soundings from the people in the room as to what their views were, and there weren't really any significant objections. I think probably the most material ones, one was from Rich Sales of Akamai, that ideally there will be a sort of a security operations working group that it could be progressed within, but there isn't, and I think that's unlikely to happen anytime soon. But he wasn't objecting to the principle of doing something. The second one from Chris Wood, one of the main ECH draft authors, was that potentially he just questioned whether it needed to be an IETF document, and whether it might be better off in some other venue. But we discussed that afterwards and couldn't really think of an obvious alternate venue, but also didn't think that would be a good signal if a body other than the IETF were to look at the practicalities of an IETF protocol. But as I say, Chris wasn't questioning whether there should be something, purely the right venue for it. So what we intend to do is we also look soundings from the people in the room whether they were interested in contributing to the activity, some of whom already were, but there were some people that hadn't previously. We did get some sort of additional volunteers to contribute to the effort, and if you like, next steps are really with me to speak to the ADs to just get their agreement it's okay to proceed. And I'll stop there. That sort of summarise about 40 minutes discussion, but that's the sort of, if you like, the salient points coming out of it. Again, happy to take questions on that if anyone has any. And equally, if you've got any questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to me directly. And let me just jump around in the running order in the meantime. Oh, if I can, I'll use the right button. Right, so, okay, so I'll then just quickly, in the remaining 10 minutes, just a couple of news headlines to highlight, just sort of rapidly changing the subject. One was, I've already mentioned, is sort of details of the 3 new standards coming out of the ADD working group, and yeah, as yourself, I posted a message about those on LinkedIn, so there's a link to that in the slide, which I'll share afterwards. Also, one of the things that caught my eye this week was Mulvad. Hadn't come across the company before. Apparently, they run VPNs, but they've announced they've also now got a DOE resolver running, which operates entirely in RAM to minimize any privacy concerns, because obviously then it's not logging anything to disks, etc. So yeah, I just thought it was an interesting twist on additional privacy that caught my eye this week. I see Peter's evidently has come across a Mulvad previously, which is good to know, and does have experience of their VPN which he uses. So it's good to hear, Peter. Okay, just the other one I'll mention, and jump in a second, is reminder RIPE's coming up shortly, the RIPE 87 meeting. The DNS working group agenda has just been published, so I'll put a link to that in the headlines as well. And also with RIPE, the DNS Resolver Best Common Practice Task Force, which is a bit of a mouthful, met in September, and the notes of that meeting have just, in the last week or so, become available. So I think that will be worthwhile, or like to be of interest to some of the people on this call to take a look at that. So there's a link to that there on the slide, which also in the headlines which I've circulated. Peter, did you want to say something about Mulvad, or indeed something else?
Yeah, I don't know if you're not familiar with them, but they have a really extraordinary commitment to privacy. They have they've done a bunch of things in the past to do with it. They started off as a VPN service, and they disabled recurring subscriptions so that, because it required them to hold on to information about customers. So they cancelled subscriptions. You can only pay like pay as you go. It's €5 a month or something like that. They also you can also pay by cash. If you just send them some money in an envelope with your account ID, no other information, they will just credit that account ID with the amount that you send. So they're one of the most privacy conscious companies that I've come across. Just a bit of a recommendation from my side. Also a decent VPN service as well, which I use them all the time, and I've never had any problems with their speeds or locations around the world, that kind of thing.
And I should have said there, apparently their VPN already runs entirely in RAM, so this is just
they've been raided more than once, and the police have just turned up to their offices and there's nothing to take. So yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, good to know. So I picked that up in the press, but I hadn't come across them previously.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that they do. But yeah, cool.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. Okay, then just two other things, not directly relevant to sort of subject matter, but caught my eye this week that I'll highlight. One was that on the back of the Online Safety Act becoming law in the UK, the regulator Ofcom has put out a consultation on its proposed codes of practice that it will use in conjunction with the Act. So it's put those out for comment, which I think runs for about 3 months, if I remember rightly. So some of you may have an interest in that. And also in a similar vein on the legislative front, under the Digital Services Act in the EU, the Commission has put out requests for information to Meta and Snap. It's over the sort of recent month or so, it's put out quite a few information requests. So these are merely the last in the sort of, or the latest in this whole sequence of those. And then finally, just a reminder on calls for papers, etc. OARC 42 meeting is taking place in early February. The deadline for any sort of presentation proposals is coming up relatively soon, the 22nd of November. So just to be aware of that. And in fact, that will segue neatly, if it wasn't for the fact I put these two slides in the wrong place. Actually, I put a few things out of sequence. So somewhere in there is seem to have overwritten my forthcoming meeting. So apologies. Forthcoming meetings. Next, pretend there is a slide for that. There was, I think, in our last meeting we discussed or it was mentioned by, I think, Ralph actually, that the NENOG 90 meeting had changed dates, and the plan had been that NENOG 90 was going to take place on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in February in Charlotte in the US. And then Thursday, Friday, OARC 42 was happening. It turns out the hotel that NENOG was planning to use has decided it's going to have a renovation, so the room is no longer available. OARC is still taking place as planned in Charlotte on the original dates. At the moment, it looks likely that NANOG will take place in Charlotte the following Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So it'll be Thursday, Friday for OARC. I think there might be a day's hackathon associated with NANOG over the weekend anyway. And then you'll have NANOG itself taking place the following week. So people that want to do both will potentially be there for the weekend with the two events running either side of the weekend rather than running Monday through Friday of the same week. But it looks likely they're both still going to happen in Charlotte. There should be confirmation that imminently from NANOG, but in the meantime, I had confirmation this morning from the OARC team that they are still going ahead as planned in early February in Charlotte, as previously advertised. So just for your information. Right, it is annoying putting these in the wrong order. Okay, right, next week I haven't finalised the topic yet, but I'm hoping that we'll pick up on the discussion that took place in part on the mail list a couple of weeks back on the challenges ahead for HTTP3. But I should be able to confirm that in the next day or so. Week after that, we've got Georgia from the DNS Research Federation is leading a discussion on sort of blockchain DNS effectively, which I know some people on this call do have an opinion about. So Georgia will and colleague will sort of lead that with a presentation and open up for a discussion on that general topic.
I'm still predicting a very short call.
I take it from that, Tal, that you're a skeptical.
It doesn't take very long to say no.
I was going to say it was either a yes or a no, but I was guessing from the tone of your comments that it was likely to be a no rather than a yes. Well, we'll see what the DNS Research Federation team have to say on the topic, but they'll give us some data input for that. Then we can have a more general conversation, which I'll be looking to with some expectation to perhaps be the first comment on then once we open up on the Q&A. And I've got a few things to add into that agenda. I mentioned about the IETF, the Internet Standards Tracker, for example, and a few other bits and pieces. If anyone's got any other topics you want me to add, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'll be happy to add those to the list. And I suppose the 18th will be, I'll put in Peter's karaoke rendition, perhaps as the main topic for that. I'm sure we'll all look forward to with bated breath or trepidation, probably. So with apologies for the slight confusion on the running order of the slides and not pressing the record properly at the start. In the remaining 60 seconds or so, does anyone have anything else that you wish to add? And I'll stop sharing. I'm sure you get fed up staring at those slides for a while. So anyone want to jump in with anything in the remaining few seconds of the call? Feel free to do so now. Either popping it in the chat or just unmute and speak out loud. Seeing anyone typing? in which case, we're just over the hour. Well, no one's unmuted, so I assume not. Well, I hope that was useful. Plenty of good stuff to take a look at on the recordings if you either missed the sessions in Prague or you didn't attend the meeting either in person or virtually at all. It was a really good week last week. So lots to catch up on. But with that in mind, have a fantastic week, everyone, as always, and look forward to catching up this time next Monday. And I'll do better on the admin on the call next week. I'll press the record button at the right time. So have a great week, everyone. Speak to you then. Thanks all. Bye.